warm welcome to the West Midlands branch launch. So I'm delighted to be here as the chair of the new West Midlands branch for IIRSM, and what will be the start of a fantastic programme of events here to support you, our members and the wider risk management community. This evening, delighted to welcome two great speakers. We have Clive Johnson, the president of IIRSM, who I'll introduce very shortly. I'll be giving us a quick presidential address. And then our key speaker this evening, Dame Judith Hackett, of course, needs no introduction, as the ex-chair of the Health and Safety and of course led the Hackett to the building at Grenfell. We'll be talking through findings and some of the key lessons learned from that. So moving on, I'd like to introduce the West Midlands Branch Committee. So with a new committee, we've started this evening for the first time, and we'll be meeting moving forward the second Thursday in the month. And delighted to welcome into the committee there, as you can see on screen, our Vice Chair, John Cliff, our Secretary, Michelle Dalby, our Treasurer, Kathy, and great team of committee members. I've known and worked with this team for many years before, and I know that we're on a great range of programme events for you, our members. We'll also be engaging with you, so if you've got any thoughts or suggestions on what you would like us to do as your local committee, then please do reach out to us and let us know what events you would like to hear from us. And in due course, hopefully year we'll be able to have live face-to-face meetings in various different locations around the West Midlands region. So I'd like to hand over to Clive Johnson, President of IIRSM. Thank you, Clive.
Thank you, John, and good evening, everybody. And first and foremost, I'd like to thank John and your new committee really for inviting me to your first ever branch meeting, which I really thank you for setting up, John, on behalf of IIRSM. So onwards and upwards, as they say. But thank you for the invite. It's very kind of you. I'm in my second term of office now as IIRSM president, and I'm hoping to get signed on for another year, to be fair, because unfortunately, because of events that's happened over the last 18 months to 2 years, I've not been able to do really what I wanted to do as president. So I'm hoping our trustees are going to invite me on to another year so I can then get out and about and do what I wanted to do in the first instance. So we'll just have to wait and see what happens come the AGM in December. So, but anyway, I would love another year as president of IIRSM. Just a bit of background about IIRSM for those on the call that don't know too much about it. We're a professional membership organisation for those responsible for managing risks in all forms. So that's not just health and safety, it works around physical security, it works around finance, it's a whole business risk arena really. So we're an independent and we speak freely, championing risk management to drive positive change for both the employee and the organisational well-being. So, and that's never been too true, and over the last 18 months where IIRSM members have really come into their own in terms of managing risk within their particular businesses. So that the skills that we have within our organisation have really come through over the last 18 months to 2 years. IIRSM provides sort of practical education, training advice, resources, networking, as we're doing tonight, and help people and organisations manage and challenge the risk that we face on a day-to-day basis. And it's a vital role that we all play now in terms of risk management, and many of us, I suppose, really, I used to call myself a health and safety professional, but I like to think of myself as a risk professional now because of the broad arena of risks that we manage, and I think that's one of the sort of points of difference that IIRSM offers, the fact that we do manage that business risk, whether it's in an office environment or whether it's on a construction site. We've got a real broad of expertise right across the organisation and the institute, and ultimately by protecting those assets we protect our profits, reputation, and more importantly people's lives. So a bit of a whistle-stop tour, a bit around what IIRSM is about, but I've been involved with it since the sort of late 90s, to be honest with you, and I think over the last 3 or 4 years IIRSM has really come into its own under the, you know, with the CEO driving the agenda and the rest of the trustees and our valued sort of branch members as well. So our vision and missions are quite clear and simple. You know, our vision's a future where people live and work in a safer, healthier and more sustainable world. The mission of IIRSM is transforming decision making through collective risk management, capability and personal impact. And our values are open, authentic, collaborative and effective. And those mission values and our vision is one of the reasons why I joined IIRSM in the first place, because of what we want to try and do in terms of getting people to manage business risk in a different way than they've done in the past. And I don't know about many people listening, but certainly my day job, risk and particularly health and safety risk is now been brought to the board, and it's spoken about a lot more frequently than it ever has been at a sort of a board level than it ever has done before. So I'm really pleased with the way that we're promoting IIRSM and our industry is going. Just a bit of information about what I do for IIRSM, and Dame Judith Hackett will remember maybe a little bit of this. I represent IIRSM as the chair of the Cognac Managing Risk Well Working Group within the HSE, and I've been involved with that since about 2007. And the fact that IIRSM is chair of the Managing Risk Well Group is a real testament to what we're trying to do, managing business risk. And just for your information, our two particular areas of focus at the moment are working at height and, no surprise, construction fire safety. And a lot of what we're doing is supporting the great work that Dame Judith's done in terms of the building a safer future and the building safety act that's coming our way. One of the areas we identified in construction was that a lot of people that manage construction fire haven't got the necessary skills generally to manage a construction fire plan. Quite often the person that's managing the construction fire plan, he might be looking after other areas of the construction phase as well. But we believe that particular role is such a key role throughout construction phase that it needs to be a person with the right competencies to manage it on a day-to-day basis. And that's looking at temporary fire stopping on a day-to-day basis. It's looking at the future strategy, and certainly with the new gateways coming in, it'll be able to align with that. But the group is to get the competencies right for the people that's managing the construction fire safety construction phase plan. So there's a lot of work being done on that. We've got all the right people around the table from all the different industry federations and all the sort of representatives from the Construction Products Association, the HSE obviously, and ultimately we'll be providing trusted guidance, not duplicating guidance, but trusted guidance out to the construction sector on that particular role. So probably by the end of the year into Q1 of next year, we'll be able to provide that industry with that guidance. And I'd say with what's been going on in the background, there's lots of enthusiasm to get this right. And we've had some great commitment from the principal contractors. In addition to that, again, unfortunately, we're still focusing on working at height, where there's far too many people still falling from whether it's a short height or a great height. And we've got to really champion that as well to make sure that people coming into work in that particular industry has got the knowledge and to choose the right type of equipment to do the jobs that they're doing. So that's one area of work we're doing. The other thing is, you're probably aware of, but I'll just reinforce it. IIRSM are working with NEBOSH to launch our new risk management course, which I'm sure a lot of your members will be familiar with this, and we'll be launching it later on in the year and really kicking it off in 2022. We're doing quite a lot of work at the moment. Tomorrow we're signing an MOU with the Institute of Directors in Ghana. So again, the international bit's coming into play. And on Thursday, I'm going to be presenting to the IIRSM Bahrain branch meeting on what does good health and safety risk management look like. So there's lots of stuff going off within our sector. I'm really proud and pleased to be part of it. And more importantly, to get this new branch aligned with all the sort of initiatives that we're doing is really great. And I'm sure John will be banging the drum and championing all the initiatives that's going forward. And so I'll say there's lots of stuff going on. Just before I hand back to John, I would just like to say this on behalf of IIRSM, and this is a personal thank you from IIRSM to Dame Judith Hackett for what she has done post Grenfell, in what she's done in terms of changing the way that we construct and manage our buildings. And like a lot of intelligent and informed construction companies and office managers and clients, they're already embracing what Dame Judith's done, and before it's even come to be axed. And So what's been done, it's going to change the lives of many, many people going forward. It's going to give some real confidence to residents in buildings, and all we can do as an institute, again, is thank Dame Judith for changing the whole sector in terms of what we think about fire and the way we occupy our buildings. But I think the biggest challenge, and I'm sure Dame Judith will speak about this later, is the changing culture of people. And that's something, whatever IIRSM can do to support and help you, Dame Judith, we're here to do it. And again, it's a big thank you for what you've done in changing the whole view of the construction sector, how we build, how we manage, and how we then look after our buildings going forward. So a big thank you for that. And I'd like to pass now back to John to get the webinar on track. So thanks again for the time, John, and I'll pass you back to you.
That's great. Thank you very much, Clive. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Dame Judith Hackett, key speaker this evening. Following Judith's presentation, if you have any questions you'd like to ask, please do post those in the chat, and we'll try and get through as many of those as we possibly. So for now, over to Dame Judith Hackett. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John, and Clive. Thank you very much indeed for that introduction and that vote of thanks and vote of confidence in what I've been doing. I'm delighted to have this opportunity to talk to a IIRSM audience. Feels like a long time since I stood up in front of a group of people from this organisation. Certainly, I was a regular visitor to IIRSM events when I was chair of HSE. And I was particularly interested in some of those remarks that you made in your opening around the move from regarding ourselves as health and safety professionals to risk managers. I never was a health and safety professional, by the way, even though I did chair HSE. I don't have any qualifications in health and safety, but what I do have, I think, are qualifications in common sense, and I bring a lot of my engineering skills and knowledge to trying to manage risk. In fact, before I was chair of HSE. If you go right back into my past when I was still working in industry, I was the global group risk manager for a UK PLC for about 4 years, and was doing exactly that, managing all of the business risks, ranging from, as it happened at that time, health and safety, through environmental risks, but also things to do with property portfolios. And interestingly, we owned an animal feed business as part of our business, and that was at the time of BSE. So it was a many and varied role, and for me it felt like absolutely the right thing to do, to bundle all of those risks together and manage them in a portfolio rather than singling out one in the health and safety as being different from all of the rest. But that's the past. Let's move on to talking about the current and a number of different roles that I have now. When I retired from HSE, I took on a number of roles and have been doing those for some time. I chair what's now known as Make UK, what used to be the Engineering Employers Federation, which is all about manufacturing in the UK. I'm also involved in engineering skills. Controversially for some, no doubt, I am on the board of HS2, so very much involved in railway transformation as well. So I keep myself busy. But if we move on to the real subject of tonight's presentation, which is about my journey back into the world of regulation and what happened some slightly more than 4 years ago after the fire at Grenfell Tower. So I think we're like many people on the night of that fire in June 2017. I watched what was going on TV, and my initial reaction was, I just don't understand how this has happened. How can we have arrived at a position where our regulations have allowed something like this to happen, and we are building buildings that burn in this way? Little did I know when I was reflecting on that, that that very subject was going to become front and centre for me very quickly thereafter, and has continued to occupy large tranches of my time since then. And just to speak to Clive's point, this is not something I intend to let go of. I said when I completed the report that I was going to see this through, because this is a once in a generation change that has to be made. But if we just look at the timeline, and for reasons that I'll come on to later, I think it is worth just reflecting on the fact that it's now over 4 years since the fire at Grenfell Tower. One of the first things that happened after that fire was that the government announced that there would be a public inquiry. That public inquiry is still ongoing, and it will be sometime next year at the earliest before that public inquiry finishes its deliberations. Yes, it's producing interim reports in the meantime, but the full gamut of that public inquiry will not complete until at least sometime in July 2022. And if you then consider that after then, you then have to implement the recommendations of that public inquiry, it starts to look like a very long time. So I want to pay tribute to Sajid Javid, who happened to be the Secretary of State for Housing and Local Government at the time, because it was he who phoned me in July of that year and said, I can't wait for the outcome of this public inquiry. I know that we need to do some things urgently, and I would like you to conduct a review of building regulations and fire safety. Don't look at the specifics of Grenfell, because that's very much the territory of the public inquiry, but look at what went wrong with the system and tell me what went wrong with the system and what we can fix. And I want you to do that in less than a year. So to be fair, I didn't know where to start, but that's where my abilities and my training as an engineer kicked in. And I can remember in those very early days when I walked into CLG, and one of the first people I met said, I suppose you're going to want copies of all of the guidance and the Building Safety Act and all of the regulations. And I said, no thanks. If that's what you wanted, you've got the wrong person. You should have employed a lawyer. That's not what I'm here to do. I'm not here to dot I's and cross T's on the regulations. I want to understand how this system works or not, and that's what we're going to do. So one of the first things that we did in those early days of the review when I started in August was to map out what the regulatory system looked like and how it was intended to work. And if any of you have read that interim report that we published by Christmas of that year, you will have seen in the back of that an immensely complicated flow chart of a system that couldn't have a hope in hell of working, if I'm honest. It was so complicated that there was every incentive for people to find ways around it and to try and bypass the system wherever possible. And I'll say a little bit more about that in a moment in terms of some of those early diagnoses of the problem. I then published the final report in May, so I met my objective of doing it in less than a year, but then very quickly became embroiled in making it happen. So in July of 2018, we established the Industry Safety Steering Group, which I chair and have done ever since then. By late 2019, the decision was made to stand up a building safety regulator, and as you now know, that will be part of HSE, very much as I intended. And the bill followed thereafter in July 2020. And that bill is now passing its way through Parliament. The second reading of the bill is complete. In the meantime, it's also become clear that one regulator will not be sufficient to change this system. We now also will be standing up a construction products regulator. And any of you who have heard the evidence being given to the Grenfell Tower public inquiry by the people who were involved in specifying that cladding system will now be as aware as I was 4 years ago of just how rotten that whole system of specifying and testing and assuring the quality of products is. So nothing that was said in the inquiry has come as a surprise to me, but I would imagine that a great deal of it has come as a shock to an awful lot of people to realise just how much gaming goes on in that system. But I'm getting ahead of myself. On the next slide, what I want to do is to just reflect on the fact that this regulatory failure that I'm dealing with, and indeed the whole issue of building safety, is not happening in isolation. Many other things have happened since then and have stolen the headlines and stolen a great deal of time of an awful lot of people, not least the government. We've had Brexit, we've had COVID-19, both are still with us, they're not over yet. All of these lorry driver shortages and all of the other things that we're dealing with right now, we all know they are all consequences of both of those things in different ways. But we are also, I think, massively more aware now of the issue of climate change and the urgency with which we need to deal with it. We're in the midst of a gas supply and cost crisis, as well as I've said, a fuel shortage and panic buying. And I just mention those things because I think it's just worth us all recognizing that the luxury of being able to deal with one thing at a time and fix it before we move on to the next problem is no longer with us, if it has ever been there at all. So this ability to juggle many different things and to avoid the tendency to move on to the next problem thinking the last one's been fixed when it hasn't, or that that's no longer important, so we move on to something else. All of that is something we've got to deal with, and that's where this business of risk management and juggling many balls, I think, becomes very, very important to us all. We also have to learn a new language. So just to show you how fresh off the print this presentation is, I was reading yesterday in the Sunday Times about this new language that is emerging around not just black swans anymore. We've been talking about black swans for a long time, but people are now also talking about black jellyfish and black elephants. And just so that we're all on the same page, black swans are isolated incidents of an unexpected and unlikely nature. Black jellyfish are isolated incidents, but ones that have lots of tentacles that spread out and have lots of other impacts that we don't realize until we start to feel the consequences of those things as they spread out. I'm sure you're already thinking of examples. And then finally, black elephants. Well, guess what? They're the things that everybody knows about and everybody's really worried about, but nobody dares talk about them. So they sit in a room and nobody addresses them at all. But that's some of the new language that is emerging and applies to many different areas, not just to building safety. But so that was just really to set some context, and I am going to come back to that later in talking about it. But I just want to go back now to what I found in my review was wrong with the building safety system. And I talk about this in quite general terms because I think it's worth any and all of us reflecting on whether or not there are other systems out there to which some of these flaws are also endemic. So what I found in my review was that the current regulatory system that we have in place, supposedly to assure building safety, particularly in high-rise and complex buildings, is weak. It doesn't work. There's very little enforcement And so concluding that we needed a new regulator was pretty straightforward. But it didn't end there, because what I also observed was that even if we had a good regulator, we had an industry that had gotten into a mode of operation of waiting to be told what to do, and then applying what I called a gaming process to that, to say, well, if you haven't told me I can't do it, I'll assume I can, which is downright irresponsible and is very much about seeing their isolated bit of the system as exactly that, isolated, and not seeing it in the round in terms of focusing on that purpose of delivering buildings which are safe for people to live in. The whole system was mired by different conflicts of interest. People who wanted to promote their particular way of doing things, people who were supposed to be in positions of independence who quite clearly were not, and therefore their decision-making processes and some of their assurance left a lot to be desired. And all of that is underpinned by an industry who seem to have missed every single memo about the need for writing things down, managing change in a disciplined way, and sticking to building what you're told to build. It's anything but. So the record keeping is poor. And that, I think, particularly for those involved in construction, if you think about the lifetime of a building in which it's in construction, this is the lifetime of that building in occupation. If you hand over a building not knowing what you've built, how are the people who are going to run it for the next however many decades supposed to know how to manage that building if you don't tell them what you have built and what's important about it? Any of you who are involved in any other industry sector, if you try and imagine handing over a car saying, well, I don't know what components we've put in it, or if you were handing over white goods to people, to consumers, and saying there's no traceability here, you would very quickly be out of business. So big issues there around traceability and record keeping. Experts not listened to. So when people said this system's not working, that voice went unheard. There is plenty of evidence now in the public domain that residents were concerned about this for a long time. They were raising concerns, and I don't just mean at Grenfell. And there's no real system to ensure that that voice is heard and listened to and treated with respect. So all of that very quickly leads you to the conclusion, which Clive mentioned earlier, around the need not just to change the regulatory system, but also to change the culture of the whole industry. I mentioned earlier that that has to extend, and remember, these were conclusions I drew almost 4 years ago in my interim report, that we needed to address this issue of product testing and labelling because it was flawed, unreliable, and opaque, to say the least. There just is a lack of competence in this sector and a lack of quality assurance. The number of times in those early days that people said to me, whatever happened to Clerk of Works? And I said, I don't know, you tell me, what happened to Clerk of Works? Well, guess what? We're going to see lots more people coming back in titles called Clerk of Works, I think, in the not too distant future, if they're not already out there. And also, I think, just referring back to what I said earlier about this new language about black elephants, it was clear to me in the early days of my review that there was a lot of unspoken knowledge out there already about the extent of shortcuts being taken, but without any real assessment of the potential consequences. What does that mean in plain English? It means people knew the system was broken before I told them, but what really happened on that night in June 2017 was that they, for the very first time, realized just how dire the consequences of that shortcutting of the system could be. And they had never envisaged that it could be that bad. So let's move on then to the new regime that we're going to put in place and what some of the features of it are going to be. The first is that we have to move away from this very fragmented and very siloed approach to things. Whether it's the guidance, which is written in lots of different silos that says, do this and you'll get electric safety right, do this and you'll get thermal efficiency right, do this and you'll address the noise abatement issues. The way guidance is written, it treats each of these issues as if they're isolated and separate, when clearly they are not. So we have to take a systems-based approach to the guidance. The regulations and the regulatory system has to be based around delivering the right outcome, not about achieving a set of isolated and independent standards. So it doesn't matter if you put in the right insulation, it doesn't matter if you put in the right electrical wiring system. If you do it badly, or if you do it in such a way that it is not installed properly, and it doesn't perform as a whole system, you will not have the right outcome. And linked to that, we need to look at buildings themselves as systems. It's no good the installer walking away from a building and saying, well, I did my bit. It's not my fault that the building doesn't work, it's someone else's. So this whole issue of who is competent to do what, who is accountable for what, and who has overall responsibility needs to lie at the heart of the new system. And that means we need a big culture change. And that is not just in terms of the way in which it's regulated, creating incentives for people who do the right thing, and putting real sanctions in place that will address those who will continue, and there will be some who will continue to try and shortcut the system. But you have to make the deterrent sufficiently high that they will think twice about doing this. It also needs to be a system that is proportionate and risk-based. I've already said it needs to be outcomes-based, and that's really important. But it's one where we will shift responsibility for delivering the right outcome from expecting the regulators and the policymakers to prescribe everything that needs to be done to one where the role of the regulator will be to say, show me that you, the duty holders, have delivered a building that is safe for people to live in. Now, all of those of you who come from a health and safety background will see that there are enormous parallels here in terms of principles with the Health and Safety at Work Act. And that shouldn't come as any surprise, because you have all heard me say many, many times that I think it is one of the best pieces of regulation that we've ever introduced into the UK, because it has delivered the right outcomes. That's how we have become one of the safest countries in the world to work. But what we have failed to do is to bring that same approach to some other important regulatory systems. And that's why this lies at the heart of the way in which we are going to change building safety. I just now want to reflect on this next slide on how this also links with a number of these other issues that are sculling around, because it isn't just building safety. We have to have a clear line of responsibility for delivering the right outcomes, whether that be buildings of quality, buildings that are sustainable and are going to meet net zero requirements as well. I think these same principles apply more broadly to ensuring quality, sustainability, and resilience of things that we build. We have to move away from a structure where regulators hold industry to account by giving them a list of things they must do so that they can tick boxes. It needs to be very much more about holding industry to account for delivering and demonstrating that they are delivering the right outcomes in the right way. It doesn't always have to be just about the regulators. There needs to be an assurance process in place underpinned by third-party accreditation, and there will be that in this new system. We have seen the Considerate Constructors Scheme stand up and develop the Building a Safer Future Charter, very much modelled upon the principles, for those of you who are aware of schemes like responsible care in the chemical industry or in the oil and gas industry. So they have taken the principles from other industry sectors and are applying those to the Building a Safer Future Charter, which will sit alongside the new regulatory regime in the built environment sector. As I said, I come to this as an engineer, and systems thinking is second nature to me now, but we all need to recognise that it doesn't matter whether you're dealing with a chemical plant or a multi-occupancy building. They are both complex systems, complex and interactive systems. You cannot say they are safe today and assume they will be safe tomorrow, because things will change, whether that's because of the chemicals circulating through the chemical plant. But in the case of buildings, it's because buildings change, and because you have human beings living in them who will do things and change things, and you may or may not know what they're doing or changing. So they are dynamic and complex systems, and that is why you have to apply that same process of putting a system in place that recognizes that some of those unpredictable things might happen, and that you have to have a plan to deal with them if they do. Because hoping that things won't happen is not and never has been a strategy. And simply by hoping it won't happen means that you don't put a plan in place to deal with that problem when it occurs. So I want to talk a little bit now about where we are on this culture change, and I'll say a little bit more later about where we are with the regulatory change, but I'm happy to answer questions on any of this when we get to it in a moment. Some of the things that we're learning from the Industry Safety Steering Group. So as I said, this was stood up in July 2018. It's still going. I think we're up to something like meeting number 27 or something. We've just produced our third annual report to the Secretary of State, and that will be published within the next few weeks, which tells him the story of where we think the problems are, where we think the good progress is being made, and here is just a taste of that. And we've seen a number of different things emerge as things have gone forward. First of all, progress on all fronts. Yes, I would agree, absolutely, with your president, that there are a number of companies out there who get this and who know the change needs to happen and are already well on the way with it. And that number is increasing now that people know that new regulation really is going to happen. But the downside of that is that there's still too many who, in my view, are using the excuse of, well, I can't do anything until I see the detail of the regulation. Well, don't wait for the detail, because there won't be any detail, because the detail of this system is you need to decide how to build a safe building, not wait for the regulator to give you every last jot and tittle on what you need to do to build a building and comply. That's not the way it will work. One of the disappointments for me has been the lack of leadership I've seen within their industry. That's not to say there isn't any. There is some, but there clearly is not enough. I've also, if I'm honest, been deeply disappointed with the way some of the financial institutions have reacted to discovering this regulatory and system failure in building safety. I think for people who are supposed to understand risk and who claim to be in the business of risk, whilst I understand that they have suffered a loss of trust and a loss of confidence, there's no doubt at all in my mind that their reaction has been to be overly risk averse. To immediately value buildings as having no value at all is ridiculous. To hike insurance premiums and refuse cover to the extent that they have, I also think is an over-the-top reaction. Because what's really important for us all to remember in all of this is that we are dealing, in the case of events like Grenfell, with black swans or black jellyfish. They are rare events. We do not have major fires in multiple occupancy buildings that frequently, and certainly we do not have ones that have the consequences of Grenfell on a regular basis. So to react in quite the way they have, I think is over the top and needs some recalibration and some bringing back to the centre. We've also learned as part of this process of driving culture change that there is a massive difference between making change for the future, dealing with how you build new build for the future, versus imposing a new regulatory structure and calling for culture change in relation to existing buildings. And my last point on this slide about the Building a Safer Future Charter, I've already covered, so I won't say any more about that other than to applaud those who've been behind it and who are driving that change as a supporting way of delivering that culture change in industry. If we look at the next slide, what I want to do now is just talk about some of the lessons we've learned from some of those other events. Because one of the things I said in my final report was that I was confident that the construction industry could make this change. And I based that view on the fact that I had watched the industry change its approach to workplace health and safety. In the last 20 or 30 years, I think we've seen the construction industry move from one that simply accepted poor safety performance as being, well, it just happens that way in construction, to one that now recognises that construction can be just as safe as any other industry for its employees. So my leap of faith, if you will, was that having done that, there is no reason at all why they should not be able to make that same journey in relation to delivering buildings that are safe for those who are going to live in and work in and use them after they have completed the job. And that assumption has been proven to be correct yet again, because if you actually look at what the construction industry has done in response to COVID, what we've seen is massive change at pace when they're called upon to do that, ditching of old practices very quickly without compromising safety and quality, dropping some of those adversarial approaches and working better in terms of collaboration and cooperation versus that fragmentation and adversarial behaviour, and a real recognition that we were never going to go back to how we were, so they had to embrace the new normal, as everyone called it. So I think we have seen from COVID that yet again that the industry is capable of change, and so building on top of that and taking that further with the building safety work should be an easier step. But having said that, I don't underestimate the size of the change that we are calling for. So let's now focus a little bit on what the new building safety regime is going to look like and what some of its features are going to be. And that's on the next slide. So this focus on demonstrating safety and fitness for purpose of buildings, I've already spoke about. What that is really about is a shift of responsibility and a shift of approach away from compliance with lots of different standards to one of demonstrate a safe system. That will be underpinned by a safety case regime for those higher risk buildings. So again, picking up on the principles I mentioned earlier, a risk-based approach proportionate to the level of risk. We can all argue over at what height should this kick in, but I think it is pretty obvious to everyone that the higher the building, the greater the risk to the people in it. Simply because in the event of you needing to evacuate a building, the higher the building, the more floors, the more difficult it is for people to get out. It's as simple as that. So that safety case regime will operate at the highest on a basis of height and higher risk buildings. But as I said, in order to ensure that what gets designed is actually what gets built, there will be gateways in the system at the design and commissioning stage that will actually put physical barriers in place that say, until you tell me what you plan to build, I'm not going to give you permission to build it. And until you show me that you have built what you said you were going to build, you are not going to have permission to put people in it. So two very important gateways in this process that will actually drive the behavior of industry needing to demonstrate that they have done what they said they were going to do. What will that do? Well, it clearly means that the supply chain is going to have to stand up to delivering that greater level of data and performance accreditation, because if you have to prove to the regulator that you've done what you said you were going to do and that you've built it in accordance with the design that they approved, then you're going to have to show to have that data to hand. You're going to have done proper performance testing. You substitute at your own risk, and you have to prove that what you've substituted is as good as what you were originally going to do. It also drives the need to use people who are competent, because you can't demonstrate not only that you use the right materials, but that they were installed by competent people. It's going to be hard to demonstrate that system safety. So this whole philosophy of product stewardship really will underpin this new regime. I said a few moments ago that this is a different challenge depending upon whether you look at new build versus existing buildings. So let's look at some of the things associated with new build. On the next slide, I talk about some of the key things that I think we are going to see change in this industry. And the first is we are going to see the construction industry move into the 21st century, I hope, with the use of digital technology and digital recording of data and of what is actually built. I also think we're going to see a greater demand from clients for that assurance and proof of quality. They're not just going to sit back and wait to see whether the regulator approves a building for occupation, because that will cost them a lot of money if the answer is the wrong answer. So I think we're going to see much more oversight by clients asking for that proof of and assurance of quality as a project is built. I'm ever hopeful that value engineering will come to be what it says it is, which is delivering value through engineering. Because at the moment it's not that, it's a euphemism for cost reduction and corner cutting, and we need to get back to real quality and value being delivered through innovation and proper engineering. I think this is a fantastic opportunity for us to truly stop the rot of poor quality building that has gone on in the UK for at least 2 decades now, if not longer, and to deliver a once in a generation shift from that race to the bottom mentality to a system of quality building that we can not only be proud of in the UK, but which we can showcase more broadly. Because one of the other things I've observed over the last 4 years is that we are not alone in dealing with this problem. There are many other countries that have similar problems. I can't point to any one country that has this problem licked completely. So I think there is an opportunity for us to lead the way in this. So in many respects, getting it right for the future is the easy bit. The existing building stock is much more of a challenge. Why? Well, because of the problems of the past. So on the next slide, I remind you of some of the things I've already said. If you don't have good records And if those good records are not only what you put into any one building, but even where those high-risk buildings exist, addressing and assessing what we already have is a massive challenge. And that has been a huge challenge for government and for local authorities in the last 4 years, is actually building that inventory of what's out there. What do we have? How many high-rise buildings? It may come as a surprise to you that no one knew how many high-rise buildings we had in England when we started on this exercise. It's also the case that we cannot simply put a new regime in place for the future without addressing the high-rise and high-risk existing buildings that are already out there and looking to make improvements in them. But in doing so, we need to do that in a way that is proportionate and which recognises that we may apply different standards going forward, but on those existing buildings, what we need is to ensure that they are made safe, but in a proportionate way. We certainly can't allow people to get away with saying, well, I don't know, so I can't do anything about it. So we have to find out. We have to do some of those intrusive searches on the buildings of highest risk. And we have to address this issue of the value of those properties and how we can rebuild confidence in the system and in the buildings so that they no longer become almost impossible to sell or to insure or to finance. So this is an area that is much trickier to address, but which we cannot walk away from. It cannot be that black elephant that we all know. We've got all of these buildings of the past that we can't fix, but we're only going to get it right for the future. That would be morally indefensible, in my view, especially to all of those people who have been living in those buildings through COVID, spending much more time in their buildings, and who don't feel safe in some of the buildings they're in. So I've talked quite a lot about high-rise buildings, but I just want to say that anyone who thinks this is just about high-rise buildings is sadly mistaken. The lessons need to be learned. They need to be learned more broadly. As I've said, we're using height as a blunt proxy for risk, but this is about, in my view, honouring that right for everyone to feel safe in their home, irrespective of the type of dwelling. To me, it's akin to no one should go home from work harmed by the work they do. That same mantra in this space is no one should feel unsafe in their home because of the way it was built or the way it's being managed. We have to base our new regulatory regime on risk, and that means learning to be proportionate to risk, not playing games with thresholds, but recognizing that there is a different approach to be taken depending upon the level of risk in any building. And this whole ethos of competence and quality assurance needs to become part of the new culture across the whole board. So we're nearly there. I'm sorry if this is taking too long, but it's a big subject. So let's just recap now. Change is definitely coming, and there are opportunities to be seized. The regulatory regime in England is going to change. There are all the signs are there that Wales and Northern Ireland are going to follow suit, but in a proportionate way, given the level of challenge that they have there compared to us. Scotland, the system is slightly different, and they have some different legal ownership models and so on. So they are doing something slightly different, but the principles are the same. Sitting back and waiting for the regulator to tell you what to do is not acceptable, and nor is it sensible, in my view. We need leaders who are prepared to act now, to show what the industry can do, and recognise that this isn't just about the moral obligation to residents. It is also about a story of the whole sector being shown to be sadly lacking in that commitment to providing quality products to the people they serve, their customers. But to do that, to learn lessons, it requires humility, it requires courage, and it requires everyone, I think, to become much more open and much more collaborative. And that's not something that's going to come easy to this sector. But you have to do that. You have to open up, and you have to use independent review and accreditation to rebuild that confidence. There's no doubt that things like the pandemic have changed the landscape, but I also think that it offers some very valuable learning lessons. So there really is an opportunity here within this sector and more broadly, which needs to be seized by all involved. So let's just finish where we started on this broader perspective, because I think it's actually quite important. Some of my broader reflections would be as follows. We are living in a world of increasing uncertainty. So that to me means that we have to get better at anticipating things that might happen. We have to get better at planning to mitigate the consequences. And we have to stop fixing the problem we've just had rather than thinking about what might it look like next time around and what might be the next challenge that we face. It's also the case that new crises are going to continue to emerge, and they are going to come at us faster than we can deal with them and fix them. So we have not got that luxury of being able to deal with things sequentially. We've got to learn to deal with multiple issues at the same time, and we must never fall into that trap of dealing with today's problem and forgetting about yesterday's problem because something else has risen up since then. And I'm particularly concerned about that in relation to fire safety and building safety. That all of these other things that have happened since must not allow us to fall into that trap of saying, well, Grenfell was a one-off, so we can walk away and forget about that and get on to all of these other things. It wasn't a one-off, it was a rare event, but it or something like it could so easily happen somewhere else if we do not make these changes. But at the same time, we must not only make buildings safe, we also need to ensure that we address issues like ventilation. We've learned from COVID that if you don't have good ventilation in multiple occupancy buildings, then they are part of the problem, not part of the solution. Likewise, we know that in relation to climate change and net zero, we have to improve the energy efficiency of all of our homes. These must not be trade-offs. These are multiple objectives that we have to meet all at the same time. That's going to require even more leadership and collective and personal responsibility. It is absolutely clear to all of us, I am sure, that governments don't have all the answers. Many of us wish they had more than they did, but they don't have all of the answers in any case. And legislation alone is never going to be the way to fix any problem unless we all step up and recognise our collective and personal responsibilities to change the system. And where all of that leaves me is to say that leadership in risk management has never been more important than it is now. And all of you have a tremendous role to play in making that happen. So thank you.
That's great. Thank you very much for that insightful presentation. That's been fantastic to hear from you firsthand and your thoughts and views on the circumstances that you did into Grenfell. Thank you very much. We've had some questions and comments come through from the audience. First one we have here is, do you see a larger modular fast-track construction method in the coming years? And if so, what impact on fire safety might this have? Modular construction.
I think it's almost certain that modular construction will have a large part to play in this, because logically, if you are moving to a more modular means of construction, you are standardizing processes, you are standardizing the putting together of the buildings. The quality assurance in the factory will be a lot easier than quality assurance on site. So I think it's right and proper that there will be a greater level of modularization taking place in construction. And again, for me, that hits a number of these different objectives at the same time, because you can achieve all of these things: better energy efficiency, the fire safety assurance of the materials used, and at the same time, inherently it must be safer to do a lot of that work in a factory than it is on a building site.
Excellent, thank you. A few questions around the clerk of works, which we referenced towards the start of the presentation. David asks, a return to clerk of works, where are the competencies to backfill those positions? And also, if we're looking back at fire safety, was that a better position than the regulatory form fire safety?
Okay, clerk of works. So first of all, a number of people said to me when we were doing the work on this review, you should specify the need for clerk of works. And I said, no. We need to specify how the system needs to work, and if as a result of that, industry recognises that it needs to employ a clerk of works to make that happen, that is a consequence. It isn't by specifying a role that you make it happen. But so for me, whether you call it clerk of works, whether you call it quality assurance manager, or whatever you call it, the role, I think, is really important, because whilst ever you are constructing on site and people are turning up with the materials, somebody needs to be checking that those materials are what you ordered and they are what was specified in the design. Because if you put it in and then it turns out that it wasn't what you ordered, or somebody it's not necessarily that you've substituted, but somewhere in the supply chain a substitution has taken place and you've put in material that no longer complies with the fire safety regulations or whatever it is, that gatekeeping role on the site and that quality assurance role, I think, is hugely important. How you do it and who you employ to do that, I think that's down to individual companies to determine. But what I'm absolutely sure about is it's not a role for the regulator. And where we've been in the past is a lot of the most common excuse you hear from construction companies is, well, the building surveyor didn't pick it up. It's not the building surveyor's job to pick it up. It is your job to do the right thing in the first place. And, that's why we need to change this responsibility dynamic to one where people feel responsible for doing the right thing.
Thank you. James asks a question regarding CDM. There's some talk and discussion about proposed changes to CDM, particularly the role of principal designer to help facilitate some of the upcoming changes. Is that happening? Do you have a timescale of when you think CDM might get revised, and what are the changes that may be as part of any potential regulations?
Okay, you're breaking up a little bit. Was the question about changes to CDM?
Yes, any potential changes to CDM to facilitate the upcoming changes that were proposed?
I don't know is the honest answer. I'm among the many things that I am doing. I'm not as close to things going on within HSE as I used to be for obvious reasons, nor should I be. What I am interested in is the way they're going to put the building safety regulator alongside that. I think what we're going to see is the principles of CDM will read across into the building safety bill, and the same. We've been very careful to try and use the same terminology as far as possible in terms of principal designer, principal client, and so on, because we want people to see the similarities between the two systems. If the CDM regs require further fine-tuning, either because we've come out of Europe or for any other reason, I'm sure that will be done going forward, being mindful of what we're now doing in the building safety bill. And that's one of the reasons why having the building safety regulator as part of HSE is really important, so that you get that kind of joined up thinking between the two sets of regulation. That's something we haven't had in the past.
Thank you, Judith. A question here from Darren says, will there be more stringent requirements on landlords of HMOs to ensure fire safety records are available?
Yes, that's a very easy question. Yes, there will. And so there should be. Yes, there needs to be a much better approach to doing the job with diligence, doing the job, and that will, for the highest rise buildings, that will be part of the safety case to ensure that that happens. But what you're also going to see, of course, is that I've talked about the building safety bill, but you've also seen the fire safety order already make its passage through the regulatory system, which now requires some of that holistic thinking about buildings, because one of the bizarre things in the past, of course, was that external wall systems were not part of the fire risk assessment of buildings. And anyone who can explain the logic of how we got to that point, to me, I don't know, but we've put that right with the fire safety order.
Excellent. Thank you, Judith. I have a question here from Christopher. He asks about BIM. Should BIM in design assurance, construction, inspection, testing, commissioning be enforced for all occupied buildings?
I think you have to be. The principle is right. You're right. Okay. So yes, we need greater levels of digital records, but as I said earlier, imposing something on existing buildings becomes very, very tricky. So I don't know whether there's anyone on this seminar who was in the chemical industry when I was around in the chemical industry in the 80s and 90s. Probably not. You're all a lot younger than that. But I can remember when the COMA regulations were introduced into the chemical industry. And so this principle that I mentioned earlier around a whole set of approaches to new build of chemical plants was one thing. But going back and applying that same logic to existing chemical buildings was a different task. And you can't expect the same level of or standards to be applied. You know, so when you build a new chemical plant, you can use state-of-the-art equipment, state-of-the-art instrumentation, and digital computer control and all of that stuff, which if you if the plant had already been there for 20 years, you can't do that. The same thing applies in this space in a way, in that when you've got an existing building, you've got what you've got. And that might be paper records. In some cases, it might be nothing at all, because no records have passed over from previous owners. So you have to start from what you've got, and there will be a minimum set of requirements. But whether or not they need to be digital, I think you have that's where you reach a point of what we really need is some decent information, and whether or not you make it digital or not is for individual owners of buildings to decide. But you have to produce it in a way that it can be shared with others, because it's not just for your benefit. One of the things that we are very clear about is that landlords need to find a way to share the critical information with the fire service, with the regulator, and most importantly of all, with the residents, because the residents need to know what are the safety critical features of their building and what are the things they need to do to help keep the building safe. They are part of the system. They need to be appraised of their own responsibilities and the things that they can and can't do and why that's important. Just as you would with managing any industrial installation, when you have to explain the reasons why to your employees, you don't just give them a set of rules and expect them to behave in the way that you've told them. You give them the reasons why, and we have to do the same with residents.
Yeah, thank you, Judith. Kelly asks, major fires in residential buildings in other parts of the world, in America, the Middle East, etc. With your review, you look at what other countries are doing. Are other countries doing anything similar to what's been proposed here in the UK? And if not, do you know what other countries are proposing to do? Looking at what the UK as a flagship.
Okay. Good question. Very good question. And I said during my presentation that we looked when we were doing a review at what was happening in other countries, and we couldn't find any kind of put it on a pedestal and say if only we could model ourselves on them, we would have this problem fixed. Because yes, there have been fires in other parts of the world. Interestingly, very few of those other fires in other parts of the world have resulted in fatalities at the scale of Grenfell. I'm sure other people would be further forward with making changes if they had. But what is true is that just about everywhere I've talked to elsewhere in the world, they've all looked at what happened at Grenfell and basically gone there, but for the grace of God go we. So no one feels complacent. No one feels they're in, that kind of can't touch me because we've got it all sorted position. But there are a number of features about buildings in other parts of the world that make them different. Some countries have much more stringent requirements for sprinklers in all buildings of all heights. Some countries operate with a system of codes, which are much more effective in some ways in terms of driving the product standards than the system we have here. One of the things that we picked up on as we looked around the world was in Germany. They have this system for complex buildings of what they call proof engineer. And really what that is about is in their case using an independent technical expert to review everything that is proposed and done around building a new building. We're going to be incorporating that into the approach of the safety case. So, it's the principle that we are picking up and learning and applying in a similar way here. So I think we've all got stuff to learn from one another. One of the countries I'm involved with, particularly in this whole area right now, is Australia. They've also had some very serious fires in high-rise buildings. The problems there are very, very similar to ours. And we are in the process of devising some very similar regulatory changes in Australia that will impact upon the system in very much the same way that we've talked about here.
Yeah, thank you, Judith. Mark asks for your thoughts on, if an emphasis is put on quality and right first time, will this reduce overall risk?
Yes, provided the design that is original. Retract. Yes, it will. Yes, it will. However, the one thing I would say is the other part of the system that is just as important is that initial procurement. What we've got to stop in this industry is people asking for a Rolls Royce and being only prepared to pay for a Mini. And all too often, that's what happens when people commission the building of buildings. And if you do that and you are asking for something that cannot be built for the money, then all of the quality assurance systems in the world aren't going to get around the problem that you've already set this project up in such a way that people are going to be looking to cut corners. So yes, quality assurance will make a massive difference, but the other bit of the problem we've got to fix is setting a realistic price and spec in the first place that is achievable.
Yeah, I think Paul follows on from that question with a question of his own that says, do you believe that better building materials scrutiny and improved vetting of tradesman competencies alone enable us to achieve safer designed and constructed high-rise buildings in the future? So quality materials and the quality of the people installing those materials.
Undoubtedly, we need both. We need both. As I said in my presentation, you've got to use the right materials, and that means not only do you need to know what the right materials are, but you need to be sure that the people who are supplying those materials are supplying you with what you actually asked for and that it meets the spec you've set. And as we know, in the case of Grenfell, there are some real serious issues in both of those areas. But you also need competent people to install those materials, because even if you start with the right materials, put it in wrong, you know, the gap between the cladding and the wall is too big, or and all of a sudden compliant materials no longer work in the way that you expect them to work. So that's why we have to take this systems-based approach. So yes, we need to have much more focus on competence and on quality assurance, for sure.
Thank you. Another question coming through: what would be the required timeframe for retaining buildings construction documentary records with the major change coming to building regulations?
Okay, well, it's going to be a phased approach. You can't, and that again, I think, adds to this complication around dealing with the existing building stock and what happens to the value of buildings in the meantime. Going forward for new buildings, the system is already starting to bite. So Gateway 1 is in place already for all new planning applications. That happened in August. So even though the regulations are not yet on the statute books, that process of looking at proposed buildings and assessing whether that looks like a good plan and a good design is already happening in shadow mode. So that's an important step on new build. And once the building regulator is up and running by the end of next year, that system for new build will be operational pretty quickly thereafter. The challenge, going back to my earlier point, is about how do you then apply that to your existing stock of buildings? Because if the bar remains set at 18 meters, which is what it says in the regulations right now, then we're talking about some 7,000 to 10,000 buildings that will need to go through this safety case process. You can't do all of those in instantly. You can't do them all in a year. So there will be a phased approach over, I would imagine, somewhere between 2 and 5 years. And the sensible thing to do is to do those buildings of most concern first. And the good news in relation to that is that that won't be based simply on height, but will be based partially on height, but also on the intelligence that's been collected around those existing buildings from the work that the Fire and Rescue Service have been doing since Grenfell to assess which are the buildings of greatest concern.
Thank you, Judith. Shazan asks, will there be a modification to the requirements of what building facilities managers and fire risk assessor requirements and competence are going to look like in the future? Proposed changes to the competence of building facilities managers and fire risk assessors.
A lot of that work has already been done. So one of the follow-up exercises to my review has been a whole raft of work that's been done around competence standards for all of those different key roles, ranging from architects, designers, surveyors, building safety managers, all of those roles. There are very clearly laid out competence standards now for all of those. What's taking the time is not defining what's required, it's actually creating that demand within industry to put people through those processes. And that's the bit that's slow in take up, and that's the bit I was referring to as part of my feedback from the industry safety steering group. And I will say this because I've said it to them personally. I think organisations like the Construction Industry Training Board have been pretty slow off the mark in terms of waiting to be asked to do it rather than showing some leadership themselves in terms of standing up some of those programs and encouraging the industry to get on with it. The one other thing I would add to this, and this is really important, is that what we don't want, and again, you will hear echoes of some of the things I used to say when I was HSE chair and what I'm about to say. What I don't want is an army of overzealous building safety managers out there who are forever looking for less and less risky features just because they're trying to prove their worth. What we need are people who are able to exercise common sense and proportion in relation to the risks. Because what we cannot do is keep piling cost onto buildings to deal with risks that are pretty rare. And I think, and I've already appeared in the media several times to talk about this. I think that's where we've got to with a lot of these 11 to 18 meter buildings, where we've gotten into this place of doing stuff to those buildings in terms of remediation that is genuinely questionable as to whether it needs to be done at all, without any recourse to the poor old leaseholder who has to foot a bill that they've had no part in discussing whether that's necessary or not. So that proportionality among those professionals is very, very important in my view.
Thank you, Judith. You introduced at the start of your presentation some terms you'd read in a recent article, Sunday Times, I think you said, about black jellyfish and black elephant. John asked my questions, what do you think would be the next black elephant in the context of health and safety, building safety?
Well, I think I cited my example of black elephant in as much as I uncovered that when I started this review, because the number of people I spoke to in those first few weeks of this review said, well, we know the system's broken. It needs someone to decide how to fix it. And you know, my question to them, so why haven't you fixed it then? What if you all knew it was broken? Why did it need me to come in and tell you to fix this? Well, Grenfell's happened now, and we never ever thought that the broken system would result in something this bad. That's a black elephant, right? They knew it was there. They knew it was a problem, but everybody kind of walked around it and said it's somebody else's problem to fix.
In the wider sphere of health and safety, do you think there's another black elephant out there? So what would that be?
Oh, in the wider sphere of health and safety, what do I think is I think there are less than there were. I think for a long time I would with hindsight describe the mental health issues of a number of sectors as black elephants, that people kind of knew it was there but they didn't want to touch it because they didn't know how to. But again, I think one of the real beneficial changes we've seen in recent years has been that recognition that mental health is a genuine and real workplace health issue and needs to be addressed. So I think we've had black elephants in the past. Do I know what the ones are now? No, because I'm not close enough to it.
Okay. On a lighter note, Catherine asks, what made you go down the path of health and safety risk management in part of your career?
Ooh, there's a deep question to answer this late in the evening. What made me go down this? Well, I've talked about this a number of times, really. A couple of things. First of all, you know, without revealing my age, I had a number of elderly aunts and uncles growing up in a heavily manufacturing and mining-based community who had suffered serious injuries at work, and I mean serious injuries at work. So you know, that whole thing about the importance of safety and the consequences of it was I felt it was around me when I was growing up, actually, especially in a mining community. But then what happened was that I went to university to study chemical engineering. And while I was, so to me, that was all about, I was good at chemistry, I was good at maths, and I'd watched The Graduate, and people said plastics was the future. How wrong were they? But that's a different story, so all of this stuff about making chemicals on an industrial scale felt really exciting and great to get into. And then while I was doing my degree, Flixborough happened. Now, again, for those of you who don't remember, Flixborough was 1974, major explosion in a chemical plant in the northeast, 29 people killed on a Saturday afternoon, and homes destroyed for several miles around as a result of that explosion. And for me, that was a big wake-up call in terms of the industry I was just about to become part of. Whilst doing a lot of good things and producing a lot of good products that improve quality of life, needed to get its health and safety right. So for me, from the day I entered industry, health and safety was never a bolt-on, and it was never a discipline in its own right. It was an integral part of doing the job.
Judith, obviously in your career, you've been a highly influential person in the health and safety world, not least of which chair of the Health and Safety Executive. IIRSM, and may well be on this call, we have a number of graduates and people who are students and people joining the health and safety profession later on in their working life. Do you have any tips or advice for aspiring health and safety and risk management professionals on this call?
Yes, I do. Never be afraid to show how passionate you are about the subject. The most boring people on risk management and health and safety are those who do it by the book. You have to do this because the legislation says so. This is a business where you win people's hearts and minds. You don't get them to do what they want to do and what they need to do by bombarding them with rules. So it is about passion and it's about persuasion.
Excellent. Really good thoughts there, Judith. Thank you. You mentioned on your last slide, the last note there, that leadership in risk management has never been more important. As the International Institute of Risk and Safety Management, is there anything that you think IIRSM could do more or could do differently for its members to help support the wider risk management profession?
I was thinking about that when I was writing this presentation, and I think the answer to that is this. So the other word that I mentioned a couple of times when I was doing my presentation is resilience, and I think we need to focus much more on resilience in all organisations. And what that means to me is as I said, and I referred to during the presentation, it's about not only preparing for the crisis we've just had so that we handle it better next time, but actually being open-minded enough to think about what else could go wrong, what else could happen, how do we prepare for the unknown as well as the known. And linked to that, the point I've already made, which is we do not have the luxury of dealing with events in isolation. We are living in a world where we have to deal with multiple challenges and multiple risks at the same time. And for that reason, I think focusing on risk management rather than health and safety or environment or financial risk or whatever it is. When I talk about risk management, I am talking about holistic risk management of all the risks in a business or an organization or a community, and recognizing that our role as risk managers is to meet multiple objectives at the same time. Not trade them off, not decide which is the highest priority, because they're all high priority. We have to learn to manage and be smart enough to meet multiple objectives at the same time.
Really good points. That's great. Thank you, Judith. Well, Judith, thank you ever so much for your time. Being with us for an hour and a half on a very busy evening out of your schedule. Really appreciate that. Thank you very much. And I'm sure members taken part in this webinar and that will listen back in their own time will take away some really strong points from your presentation. And finally, just as we close the event this evening, I'd just like to thank you again on behalf of the committee, and hopefully members have enjoyed our first and inaugural meeting for the West Midlands branch. We really appreciate it along. I keep speaking to you. Very, very much appreciated. Thank you very much for all your help and support. Moving forward, our next event is on the 14th of October, and our guest speaker there is Dr. Professor Andrew Sharman. Please make a note of that date in your diary. The time again will start at 6 p.m. Members would like to register for that. You can find the details on our LinkedIn page. Please do check into our LinkedIn page. There'll be regular updates there on events that are coming throughout the rest of this year and into next. If anyone's interested in finding out more about the different roles on the committee, again, please do make contact and keep in touch with us. And if you've got any suggestions or ideas on future events, please do let us know. But for now, that draws this evening's presentation and meeting to a close. Thank you ever so much for everybody who joined in to attend. Thank you again to Clive Johnson, President of IIRSM, and of course, Dame Judy coming along sharing their thoughts with us. Many thanks, everybody. Stay safe, and we'll speak again soon. Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Bye.
That was great. Thank you, Judith. Take care. Bye-bye. And thank you,
Bye.
everyone, for attending. Bye.